now I had to shift not only my physical activity, but my emotional activity, and thus my habits and my behaviors and my beliefs. So everything came kind of in line. It was like, okay, you can take this failure and you can either go down one road or the other road. And fortunately, I chose the high road.
Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Carrie Siggins, and I'm so glad you are here today. Today, my guest is Greg Voisen. He is an author, speaker, a podcaster, and what he calls himself as a resultant, which is a consultant who gets results. I absolutely love Greg. I was on his podcast, Inside Personal Growth, where he's interviewed over 1,100 authors and leaders and has just amazing content. He also has a consulting company called eLuminate, where he helps small to medium-sized business owners on financial management, human resources, capital development, process improvement, sales and market, succession planning, and ESOP, which I find really cool. He's also an author. He's written several books, which he talks about in the podcast, and he's just an awesomely amazing human being, and I can't wait for you to meet him. So hang tight, and I'll be right back with Greg. Welcome back, everyone. I am so excited to introduce you to Greg Voisen. Greg, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Carrie. I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's always nice to speak with a fellow podcaster. I've had this opportunity not many times, but when it comes up, I certainly take the opportunity because I think our listeners can learn, and I believe you and I can learn.
How long have you been podcasting? Something like 18 years?
18 years and 1,100 and something plus podcasts.
And I can only imagine how much you have gained from interviewing some of the most brilliant minds out there. So you have so much to share.
Well, thank you for that. I got into this kind of all by mistake. My son said, "Hey, Dad, let's start a podcast show." This was like 18 years ago. And I was like, "What's a podcast show?" And it went from there. And it was because I was involved at the time in a financial services industry. And I was at a thing called Court of the Table, Top of the Table, MDRT. And I would hear these great speakers. And I got very close to many of them. And I started inviting them to the show. And before I knew it, I had Marshall Goldsmith and Ken Blanchard and all kinds of people and Stephen Covey all saying, "Yeah, we want to be on your show." And it wasn't because it was an early show. It's just because they really liked the idea of being on something new.
Yeah. I know. I remember when I recorded my podcast with you, I think you were just finishing up with Guy Kawasaki, and you let me in a little bit early. And I said, "That's so cool that you have all these amazing guests, and I want to be able to get guests like that." And you said, "Oh, but I knew them all before they were famous."
I did know a lot of them before they were famous. That is true. That is true.
So tell us a bit about your podcast, so Inside Personal Growth, and really what you've gained from it over the years of 1,100 episodes.
Well, the show, as I said briefly, how it started, back then it was kind of challenging to put together a podcast, not like it is today with all the technology, the opportunities. And we were on audio only. We weren't video back then. All this is way pre-COVID. The interesting thing about the show is I always started off with personal growth, business, wellness, and spirituality. And I realized that in the business world, which a lot of our listeners at the time would come from, some from Facebook, but a lot of them from LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And we knew this was an area where there were seekers. We always call it, well, who are the seekers out there? And usually the curious ones are the middle management and top management of companies saying, "Hey, we've got a problem. We'd like to bring somebody in to speak. We'd like to do a workshop. We'd like to do something." My show started to become what I'm going to say the opportunity to not only promote the authors who wanted to do the workshops, but actually for me to substitute a workshop where they could actually either listen and or read a book I know that sounds kind of weird anymore, but to read the book in the company and have a little book club. And it sprouted from that because a lot of my authors would say, oh, this company ordered a case of my books, or I got a case of these books sent to XYZ company.
I love that. Oh my gosh, how fun. Now, before you were podcasting, you've built several other companies, haven't you? And I think a broad range, a toy company and a software company. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did before this podcast? Or maybe even are still currently doing?
I am still currently doing, but I was in the financial services industry, and I have to say, after many years, I felt a little burnt out, like a lot of people get doing things. You get to kind of the peak of your game, and then you say, what's next? Or where could I go? Or what could I do? And I was always an extremely curious person, so I would always look for things that intrigued me that I thought would give me a diversion from, I'm going to just say it, the pain that I was suffering and what I was doing. Because frequently, like a lot of people, I didn't turn to drugs. I just turned to another adventure, something that I thought would be fun and cool and whatever. So I was a serial entrepreneur and probably still am to that degree. One of the first ventures was something I did called Sales Solution Systems for the financial services industry. And I teamed up with David Allen getting things done. And I was actually running courses running around the country. Believe it or not, I remember flying into Denver for an event, and it was blowing snow, and we had to de-ice the plane wings. And I was doing events for people around purpose, process, programs, and productivities. I call them the 4 Ps. And people would say, well, why are you talking about this thing called purpose? And I said, if you don't have any purpose in your life, you're probably not going to be a very good salesperson. And I'd go and speak to a big group, and it was interesting after I was done. It's like 1,500 people or whatever was there. You get a handful of people, just a handful, that really got it. It was like, I really understand how important purpose is. So I had created a system. Then after that, somehow someone came along and said, well, I have this thing. Would you be interested in getting involved? And it was a company that ended up being called Wannabe, WANNA-BE. They were wannabe dolls. And if you go back and even look on the internet today, you will see them. This was like this almost right after Cabbage Patch. And so I ended up being the person that focused on the manufacturing, did all the contract negotiations with China, did the letters of credit, lines of credit, the sales, built the warehouse, put the thing together, distributed to Toys R Us back when Toys R Us was a company, and it went from there. It did not succeed. It was actually quite a failure, and I learned a lot of lessons from that. Lessons around finance, lessons around running a business, lessons around sales, lessons around the importance of really understanding your market. You can't just say, well, I think somebody's going to beat a pathway to my door because I have a better mousetrap. Doesn't always happen that way. The other thing after that was I springboarded into a software company called Maestro, and we were developing software for the training and learning industry. Now, this was really interesting because we were right at the cusp at the same time Facebook was coming out. So if anybody can remember, here we are saying, oh, we're going to teach people, we're going to build this LMS, learning management system. We're going to put in great videos. We're going to put people in front of green screens. We're going to go out and do all these things. And we did. We started. And I will have to say that the competition was so great in that field that we took it to Dale Carnegie, and Carnegie said that they needed twice the amount of money to invest in it that we required. And I remember flying home on the plane with my son, and I said, hey, Sean, can we pull this off for what Dale Carnegie wants to invest in this? And he said, really, Dad, I don't think so. I think that if you can't get the sum of money required between the programmers and everything we've got to do, it isn't going to happen. So I made a decision at that point not to proceed forward and do a merger with Dale Carnegie.
Oh my gosh, that had to have been such a tough decision.
It was, because it was a baby. We had gotten to a certain point when you incubate something and you have this great idea and it's proven, and then you have a very large company that could infuse it with capital to take it to the next level, saying, hey, we'll give you X, but we won't give you Y. And for us to say, hey, this was kind of our last pitch. We were pitching it out there. We had gotten bites from other people, but Carnegie they said, hey, we will give you that. So they were trying to get a bargain. Although if we had given them a bargain, we wouldn't have been able to deliver what we needed to deliver.
Yeah, that's smart. Hard to turn down. But I think that's such good analysis to be able to say, can we actually do this? And it is. It's other people's money. It's your money. It's your baby. It's your reputation. All of those things that you have to think about if you fail.
Right.
So what did you do after that?
After that, I regrouped and I looked at my life and I did a sidestep. And I said, instead of being a licensed salesperson, I'm going to be a consultant to these businesses. And what I've found is every time I went in, Carrie, that there'd be the same complaint, because our company, eLuminate Inc., eLuminate.net, but the company was eLuminate Consulting Inc. We'd hear the same thing from the owners. It was like, we have these medical insurance plan, benefit plans, and all this stuff, but nobody really appreciates it that much, and the costs just keep going up. And so I started advising on wellness. And I said, I think what could happen is if you really modify the behavior and help the people, I always had this hypothesis, help the individuals become well, both emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, physically, that you could have a healthy organization. And so I got very heavily involved in learning everything I could there. And I teamed up with a company that was teamed up with Mayo Clinic with a product called 24 Life. And it was a digital app to help people in most areas of their life improve emotionally, physically. And did we see a correlation in premiums? I know a lot of companies say, well, if I put $1 in, I should get $3 back because my employees will be healthier and whatever. Yeah, we saw those kind of numbers. Did we see astronomical numbers? No. And I think because there's always non-compliant. It doesn't matter what group you have, you're going to have certain people that are going to be non-compliant. They just don't want to do it. Right?
Yep.
So I went from that, without deliberating too much longer, into just consulting business on operations, ESOPs, employee benefit plans, and the like, everything. And I went back and got a degree in spiritual psychology. I used the psychology degree to work inside mainly family businesses where the mother and father or whoever was in the management team wanted to pass the business down. How were we going to make this happen? And I had all the degrees in finance and everything, but I realized it wasn't about what the accountants did in the end. It wasn't about the study for the ESOP. It wasn't about any of that. It was really about the owners saying, I'm really willing to let go, and it's time. And I know I can do this effectively, whether it was through selling the business to the kids or putting in an ESOP like you did.
Yep. Were you familiar with employee ownership and ESOPs? How did that become part of your consulting practice?
I was always on the outskirts of ESOPs. I think ESOPs is such a specialty. Even today, I will call in other experts besides myself because there are so many nuances associated with it. You just can't be certain, and you don't want to give people bad advice. So, the whole thing around the trustee and who the trustee is going to be, and they're going to negotiate in behalf for the employees. And then I got involved with, Ledoux was his name, and he was from France. And, many of the companies in Europe, they're co-ops. So I started studying co-ops, and I started trying to really understand that marketplace. And then I really dug deep into the mechanics and really trying to understand it. And that's really all you have to do is you have to be one step above everybody else when you're consulting in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you have done so many pivots, and I know that you're a big believer that failure fuels growth. So can you talk a little bit about how you used each of these when you had to walk away from your baby or say, hey, this isn't working, or pivot your consulting business? How did you use those perceived failures or things not working out the way that you thought that they were going to help you move forward and grow?
Good question. I think the first thing we default to as human beings is, we have a reduction of serotonin and the dopamine within our system. So emotionally, when something like that happens, we get down. And we get down both physically because something truly does trigger inside of our body. And what I realized is the things that counteracted that was more activity. So what I mean by that is, okay, we could all say, well, you're going to get a dopamine high if you go for a run, or you go to the gym, or you go on your life cycle, or whatever it is, or Peloton. Now I had to shift not only my physical activity, but my emotional activity, and thus my habits and my behaviors and my beliefs. So everything came in line. It was like, okay, you can take this failure and you can either go down one road or the other road. And fortunately, I chose the high road. I did not choose to go down a road with drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. I chose to go down a physical activity, meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, that kind of thing, which got me into the Eastern philosophies. And I started going to get this degree in spiritual psychology. And I remember waking up one morning and my roommate was a guy and he was sitting there at 5 a.m. meditating, and I had never meditated. It's like, whoa, what are you doing? He says, well, I meditate. He says, do you want to go with me to the temple of Paramahansa Yogananda, Self-Realization Fellowship? And I was like, hey, I'm game. So I went, and I ended up becoming a member of Self-Realization Fellowship, and yoga and meditation have been kind of the path of choice to keep me a little bit more on even keel. And so what I learned from that was any of us can get through it. We can grow through it versus go through it, right? You don't want to just go through it because you don't learn anything from it. But if you grow through it, you can get to the other side and you can pivot, and you can pivot very quickly.
Yes, I agree completely. How have you used your spiritual psychology degree now on top of this? Like, what is your life like now that you even have this deeper understanding and education around, the mind, body, soul, spirit connection?
Well, I've interviewed so many people from Ram Dass to Ken Wilber to you name it, to Thomas More, some very, very famous people on philosophy of religion, spirituality. And if there's one thing that I would say is that no matter what your chosen path is, Christianity, Judaism, Muslimism, Sikh, all paths kind of lead up the mountain from a different direction, but they all kind of are saying the same thing. And one of that is compassion for self and compassion for others, love for self and love for others. And don't take this as being too airy-fairy. Just take it as, if you really realize that you're angry and you beat up on yourself, you're probably angry and beating up on other people as well. And the people around you begin not to like you so much. And so you wonder why your relationships are distant or whatever is happening in your life. And so once you reassess that and you retarget and you put some grit and determination and commitment in your life and have purpose, you can actually re-enliven your whole being.
I so agree with you. I have been on that very similar journey myself. With love and compassion, like I just feel like we're going to get philosophical here. There's just all this potential that's out there, and energy, it's living there in potential. And if you activate that with positive emotions, with love and compassion and mercy and joy, how that takes you in such a different direction than if you activate that potential with negativity or selfishness or judgment or any of those other things. And of course, human existence, we're going to feel all of those things. But if we can get ourselves into that space of how am I going to affect this potential moment, this potential energy, and with positivity, and what path will that take me down? It's so empowering. But I think so many of us are just living in the moment, living in that emotional moment, right? Of just reactivity and not really thinking through, wow, if I make this choice and choose to react this way, it is going to take me down a very different path than if I choose to show up with love or compassion or self-care or whatever term is appropriate.
Yeah, yes, absolutely right. I always have like a little sign, and I could show you my clock, but I have to pull it off the wall. But I could hold this up.
Yes.
It says, "Be here now." And we really only have this moment that you and I are with us. Now, people will say, that's kind of silly. And I say, well, but yesterday is a canceled check. Tomorrow's a promissory note. Nobody knows if you're going to wake up. So now let's talk about death and finitude. And your finitude really brings you to a realization that all you can be is the best you can be now. So why be anything other than that? Why try to be anything other than that? But remembering it is the key, because our subconscious mind is so strong with the thoughts that really want to take people on this path that's like the pity party path, because the ego is there and it's saying you're not enough. And so in one sense, it's trying to protect you. But I say become friends with the ego and understand what actually is going on. But in the subconscious side of the brain, I would tell anybody, and I'm not ashamed to say this, I have a hypnotherapist that works with me on a frequent basis to get in touch with that side of my brain. And he is amazing. And he taught me a lot. And he has a book out called Healing Beyond Pills and Potions. His name is Dr. Steve Berman. He also has a book about worry. But you think about how many times do we think about and create hypothetical situations about, well, if this happens, that's going to happen, and this happens, that's going to happen. And before you know it, you go down this road and then you're frozen. You're just completely frozen. You can't make a decision about anything because you worried yourself into the corner.
Yes, I know. Busy mind and where it takes us. One of the things that I really practice, I was talking to you in the pre-show about a bunch of changes that we're going through here at Stone Age. And it's really easy to get caught up in the, okay, what's going to happen? What's the outcome going to be? And one of the things that I really do is I just try to remind myself that this is an experience. How do I become less attached to the outcome that I want, my likes or my dislikes? I don't like where this is going. I like where this is going, and just say, okay, I'm just here to experience it. This is just an experience, and I want this to have love and joy and compassion, even though it's hard. And that helps me be able to unplug a little bit from that worry, that planning, the trying to fix things that we all go to. Of, okay, I'm just going to try to just experience this and look at it as an experience and not try to judge something if it's good or bad, because how many times have we said something is going to be really bad and have this really negative outcome, but it's one of the best things that's ever happened to us because we just had no idea that that could be a potential outcome. And so that's how I've been trying to like deal with my overactive mind is this just an experience? How are you going to experience it?
No, and that's a great way to look at it, because one of the precepts you're basing your decisions on is a Buddhist precept. There's the Four Noble Truths, and then there's also this precept of non-attachment. That particularly comes from the Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah.
And if I really look at myself, I'm more Buddhist than anything. And I'm not ashamed to say that, because when everybody says, well, they hear the Dalai Lama say compassion is what's going to help solve all the world's problems, he's absolutely right, because it's compassion. I just got a book in here from a guy in Spain about compassion in business. I mean, this is a big textbook like this that he's going to be on the show. But all he focuses on when he teaches the kids in the business school is compassion in business, right? And so where we've come from is really unique when you think about it, because it was all about me, 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 me. Now
Yeah.
it's become about we. And I think the most important thing about we, when you have a company like you have, is that is people don't do that for the gain for themselves. They do that to share their heart and everything with the other people as well, meaning everybody else in the group. And you'll find that companies like yours will go so much farther, so much faster when
Right.
you do something like an ESOP, because it's truly sharing a piece of the return of the business. And by the way, I've put my heart and soul in it. Why shouldn't I get something out of this too and sharing it equally?
Yeah, I agree completely. And so how do you bring this idea of compassionate leadership, running a compassionate business, building a compassionate business into the CEOs, to the clients that you work with?
Let's put it this way, it's not difficult at all when somebody comes to you and is already in pain because they've tried different ways and they haven't worked. And I've found over the time, never try and convince anybody of this. Let people come to you when they're ready. Now, that may sound really strange, but I've been doing this show for 18 years, and I could say, well, you're trying to convince people about spirituality and personal growth and business and wellness and all that. And I'm saying, yes, I am. But at the same time, if I don't continue to seed you, how do I know when you're going to be ready? When are you going to grow? So all I do is just keep putting water on it until it's ready to grow and be harvested.
Yeah.
And so how I convert people to this is I don't convert them at all. I allow the language from within inside of them, the pain from within inside of them, the what I want to call the angers, the frustrations from within inside of them come to a point where they realize they can't withstand that anymore and they choose to do things differently and transform themselves.
Yeah. And what happens if a leader doesn't get to that point? I've seen people who are just so miserable, so stuck and unable to help themselves. Do you think that all people can come around, or do you think that there are people who will just die, just like never being able to do that inner work, that maybe they're so attached to their pain that they don't know how to actually let it go?
And I would say, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
I think that the answer to your question is, will many people choose not to take the action?
Yeah.
Yes. Will
Yeah.
those people at some point beyond that, when they're at their deathbed, maybe have some realization that maybe some of the mistakes they made? I hope they don't go with that regret. I remember doing this interview with Marshall Goldsmith, and around some of the top executives that he's coached over the years, and we're talking big time Fortune 500 company CEOs. One of the things he said, and I'll never forget this during the podcast, he said, they could have 5 or 6 degrees, a doctorate, own 2 or 3 companies, have a $10 million house, and they always wanted more. When is enough enough? When are you going to stop and just count the blessings and be grateful for what you've been able to create versus just, I'm going to continue to go after more and more and more and more? And he said at times when he's coaching these people, they're so dissatisfied. And it's that level of dissatisfaction that drove them to where they are. But it gets to a point, you got to realize, because those are the kind of things that kind of propel you, right? It's like, things aren't right. I want to fix it. I want to grow this company more. I'm going to keep doing more. But now when you've got all the money and you got all the possessions and you've built the 5 or 6 companies or whatever you might have, and things are going well for you, why does that same driver take hold? The driver now should be is, how much can I give back? How much can I contribute? What can I contribute to the world, and how can I do that? And that's the question I'd ask most CEOs who are in a position where they've made everything that they really need in this lifetime. So now how do you give back?
Yeah, I think that comparison thing, right? There's always going to be somebody who's wealthier than you or more successful than you. And I think when we get into that comparison, that's what keeps that driving, even though we might be exhausted by it or miserable by it. But it's like, oh, I want to be richer than my neighbor over there. I want to have a nicer car than that person. And it's so unimportant in the whole scheme of things. What is actually important is the impact and how you give back and how you grow. But I know the human need that we have to compare ourselves to others. I think it's a part of what keeps people really stuck.
Well, look, happiness and contentment. And people say, well, you're content and you're happy. Yeah, I would say contentment is a big one. And so if people could define what contentment would be, I'd ask them to say, what is that? Because truly that is one of the biggest factors to say, oh, what I have is okay. I
Yeah.
don't need more to make me happy. So if I don't need more, what can I do to help somebody else get to the same level that I'm at?
I love it. I think it's brilliant. One more question before I ask you my final question. How do you feel curiosity plays into this? I know you are a very curious person. You've probably read all of the books behind you. I know you're an avid reader, a lifelong learner. You are truly interested in being curious about other people. How does curiosity fuel you? And when you're thinking about this idea of compassionate leadership, understanding that our spiritual sides are so integral into everything that we do in life, how do you think curiosity plays into that?
I think fundamentally, not everybody is curious, but those that are curious. I remember having Stephen Kotler on here, wrote the book Abundance, The Rise of Superman, and all around flow, getting in flow and the Flow Genome Project. And we had this discussion around personal growth. And at the top of everything, for most people who are in positions like you and I, is our curiosity. The curiosity then leads to whatever we were maybe curious about. Maybe it was about surfing or skiing or building a business or whatever it was, or it was a hobby we had a curiosity about. But the reality is it led to us finding a purpose. We had a really strong purpose. From that purpose, then, we had the drive then to establish goals and a vision and all the initiatives that are created around that. So in reality, at the front end of all of this stuff, before we get to the purpose, is our own curiosity. And then to take whatever it is that we are thinking about and turning that into our purpose for our life, and then turn that in to goals and aspirations, and then turn that basically into subset goals and the things we're going to do. I defined my personal purpose as I exist to serve, to inspire passion. I did that a long time ago, but I looked at passion a little differently. Biblically or spiritually, passion was taking people from a position of unclarity or confusion to a position of clarity and understanding. And if you really look at what I do for my life as a consultant and a podcaster, that's all I'm doing. I mean, that's all I do. I don't do anything else. And if I wake up every morning and I go, today, one of my goals and my purpose is to help make things clear, not only for myself, but for others, I've done all the work I can do.
Yeah. I love that. You're so inspiring.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Yes,
I'm glad I'm glad I made you smile.
You did your work today. You lived your purpose today. I love it. I do. I feel so much better. All right. Final question before we talk about how we can find you. So the name of this podcast is Reflect Forward. What does Reflect Forward mean to you?
I think it's really about how we actually can paint the picture in our mind about what our future can be. And so you say, well, I'm reflecting forward. And I say, what does forward look like to you? Because you're not going reverse. You've already been there. That's a rear view mirror. You're saying, I'm looking out the front windshield. And I'm saying, if I'm looking out the front windshield, it's how I'm looking out there. It's how I've actually designed whatever is in that windshield that's coming toward me that actually creates my reality. But I create my reality right now about the windshield and the view that I create to reflect forward.
Thank you so much. I knew you were going to have something else that would inspire all of us. All right. So how can people find you?
They can find me at insidepersonalgrowth.com. That is the podcast. There you'll see 1,100 podcasts. Consume at will because there is no barrier to entry. It's all free. They can find me also from the consulting side at hackingthegap.com. That's a book I wrote called Hacking the Gap, From Intuition to Innovation and Beyond. I also was the co-author of a book with a gentleman by the name of Bo Parpet and Kathy Sparrow called The Precipice of Life, which is another place they can see me on Amazon with that book. I had a lot to do with that book. And the last place is the consulting company is eLuminate. That's spelled eluminate.net. There they can learn more about the consulting company and obviously at gregvoisen.com.
Wonderful. And I will include all of that in the show notes. And I have those, your books, sitting right here over on my desk. And I'm traveling next week and one of them's going with me. So I'm super excited.
Well, Carrie, it's a pleasure being on your show, Reflect Forward. I hope everybody who listens to this and all your other podcasts gains insight and wisdom from somebody like yourself who's really been there and done that. And I really mean that. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. And I think what you're bringing to the world. And really, I look at you, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a CEO of a company. You have all these things. You run a podcast show, you wrote a book. All of that just tells me one thing. You love achieving, but you also love helping others by how you achieve.
I look at leadership as not how people experience me, but how they experience themselves in the presence of my leadership. And that is really what I inspire to do, right? How can I lead in a way that inspires people to dig deep within themselves and be the very best version of themselves in that moment, to go after their dreams, to believe in themselves, to take a risk, to do something big. And so that's how I try to show up in my podcast and in my book and in my leadership is how do I help people see the very best within themselves and go after it?
I think Guy Kawasaki said in that interview, and people can listen to it, the one I did, he said, think remarkable.
Yes,
I
love it.
Don't
Beautiful.
Think different, think remarkable.
Think remarkable. Yeah, good. I'm totally stealing that. All right, Greg. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Such a pleasure to talk with you again.
Thanks, Carrie.
All right, thank you. All right, hang tight, everybody. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Greg. Be sure to check out his books, check out his website, and check out his podcast. It's really fantastic. He interviews killer guests. I'd love to have some of the guests he has on his show on mine. So maybe someday I'm going to put that goal out there and manifest it. All right. With that, I will leave you to your week. I hope it's a good one. And please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, write a review, go to YouTube and subscribe to it, share it with a friend so you get amazing stories like Greg's out there. I so appreciate it. And don't forget to check out my book, The Ownership Mindset. You can find it on Amazon. Just go on and search The Ownership Mindset, Carrie Siggins, and you'll find it. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And I'll see you next week.